Good morning everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar, Safety in Small Business in Simple to Follow Steps. I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania and also the coordinator of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. I'll also be your moderator for this morning's webinar. Before we do get started though, I'd appreciate that you take a few moments to read the following slide about information delivered during WorkSafe Month sessions. I'd now like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's webinar. So we've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface and you should see something that looks like this on your computer screen in the upper right corner. You're likely listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. However, if you'd prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing in your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You can send your questions in at any time during the presentation. We will collect these questions and address them during the webinar and at the end of today's presentation. We are also recording webinars during WorkSafe Tasmania Month and will progressively make those webinars available on the WorkSafe Tasmania website at the end of WorkSafe Month. And lastly, once you do leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation and we would certainly appreciate you taking a few moments to complete that feedback form, giving us your comments about today's presentation and also about your webinar experience. It is now my pleasure to hand you over to Neil Johnston from Small Business Safety Systems to present this morning's webinar, Safety in Small Business in Simple to Follow Steps. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, today's session, I made a comment a little while that some are more audit focused, some are more academic focused. What I wanted to provide today was a very much practical session. So as I go through the slides, I'll give some examples, and the idea is that I want to be able to give you something you can take away from today. There's a chart slide 36 we'll spend a bit of time on, which is a new way I work with people. And I think it's about the most economic way we can try to identify the steps we need to take and in what sequence, so that we don't end up going backwards or you don't end up with a pile of safety paperwork on your desk and thinking, how do I put this together so it actually works for me? Because a collection of paperwork, as we all know, is not that helpful, but a system that's working is actually easy to manage and easy to follow through. So as Stephanie said, any questions, send them through to the seminar. If I can't answer them right at the time, I'll get some information for you. Webinars information will be available later. That's already covered. I'm just catching up on my slides here. So it's a practical session to actually show you what most of the businesses that I work with have in their workplace. So who am I? I've had an interest in workplace systems, not just safety, for 20, 30 years. I'm fascinated in how people work with paperwork. I'm fascinated in why they don't work sometimes. So over the years I've got a diploma in OH&S and Community Services Management. About 20 years ago I did a registered lead auditor's course, and that was invaluable in getting me to understand that level of audit and how it actually impacts on safety systems, because if you've got the right document and the right edition and the people are trained right, it's very easy. If those things aren't right, you've got a lot of problems trying to catch up. I've written over 180 safety systems. My business now is supplying systems to people at a monthly rate. This now allows me to actually have more impact on lots of other businesses rather than on a one-to-one basis. And a lot of people don't need one-to-one anymore. They've got an understanding of the legislation. I've investigated some quite serious accidents. Um, some of those have involved people being in a coma in hospital while we're trying to find the family. Some of those have been dealing with WorkSafe to try and work out how we can prevent this from ever happening again. Some of those other ones have been where machinery has got tangled up with other pieces of machinery, and everybody would agree unpredictable, but when you look at it, you can actually start to see some common themes. I've conducted over 200 inductions for 2,200 people. It's probably many more than that. I think I've heard every comment and criticism and positive and negative message about safety in the workplace. I actually don't like a lot of paperwork. I like it to be very lean and clean and easy to follow. If we do the extra work in a workplace to actually design an induction form that is really clear and accurate, the induction usually takes much less time. And particularly for some people who work in mining companies where they are mandatory to attend a 1 or 2 day induction on each site each year. So if I can do an induction for a workplace that takes a couple of hours but is effective, I find that people are much more compliant with that system as work into the future. If people are bored during inductions, it's a problem, and it means that your system hasn't really got a base, and forever there will be issues that are cropping up. Last 12 years I've been in safety, and first real experience of it was in Broken Hill when I started out as a 17-year-old and worked underground. And where I'd worked in Tasmania before I'd actually started was very much you just did your work, and if you got hurt, you got hurt. And when I went to Broken Hill, I worked underground, and safety was paramount with everybody. It was a shock. It was to see people actually working safely, caring for each other, and it was really strong. And I really didn't experience that until about 20, 30 years later in Tasmania, when workplaces started to catch up to what is needed. Uh, to operate my field, I've got professional indemnity insurance and public liability, and been an active member of the Safety Institute for the last few years, but a member since 2006. Something that I think is a great organisation and well worth joining, and I've learned a lot by being around them. So it's a practical session to teach you what to do in your system as against me becoming permanent part of your business. I work as a consultant to some businesses, but it's usually to add to what they've already got. And as I said, other approaches can be more academic or more audit focused. So I hope this is what suits you today. I was trying to think of what's the practical thing I'd like to walk away with. If there's any questions, send them through to Stephanie and she can send them over to me. To help with the explanation, I'll give examples as I go through the webinar. Now, the question that I asked at a conference a little while ago, does anyone here deliberately set out to hurt people? And everybody just looked at me kind of blank and said, you know, no. But I asked the question, does anyone have one of these? And people said, oh no, but you know, you can transfer your duty, you can make, you can tell people they're accountable for it, and then if they don't do it, it's their problem, not yours. I shortened their statement a bit in that statement, but essentially everybody is accountable for safety, and if you accept that at the front, you've got the first thing in your mind about what's right. If you've told everybody what to do and you've made perfect systems available for them and it's clear and they know what to do and they don't do it, yes, they are accountable, and yes, WorkSafe may fine them, but it doesn't mean that you're not accountable, because if it happens as a one-off, you're probably not. Can't give that guarantee, but it's probably not. But if it happens 3 or 4 times and you haven't picked it up, then it does come back to you. And areas like this are where, an example the other day was person should have lodged an incident report and didn't. The boss's defence was, I told them in the induction and they've signed a form that they should have reported it and they didn't. And said to the boss, the manager, look, you're probably right in what you're doing on a once-off, but have you got a history of people reporting in your organisation? He said, when they need to. I said, well, what about, have you got a history of people reporting not so much when they need to, but as risks crop up? And it turned out that only 2 incident reports have been put in the last 12 months, and they were for incidents where everybody knew it was going to get picked up. So what it told me was that all of the minor incidents and the medium incidents were probably not getting reported, and the ones where somebody was going to ask a question were. So again, it comes back on the manager, the boss, the office of the PCBU, person controlling the business or undertaking, to actually be responsible. So another question I ask at conferences is, does anyone here know of anyone who's hurt at work or much worse? And invariably in a group of 20, there is 4 or 5 hands go up, and often 1 or 2 have spoken about serious incidents where people have been seriously hurt, impacted, hospital, families impacted, and everything. Now, in my line of work, when I go out, if I take in a copy of the Act and the regulations and the 30-odd codes of practice and the stuff from WorkSafe Tasmania, everybody looks at me like, oh yeah, I'm going to read that. But what I'm really talking about is saying you do have to comply with these things, but to really know where to go in the 600 pages of the regulations is you've got to know what you're doing at the front. And unless you accept this part and the real in red there, what is the real reason that motivates me to work in this field? It's not safety. Look, you can work in any fashion of work or colour, pedigree, whatever you want. What really motivates me in here is people. And the real reason you should be safe at work is that unsafe acts can hurt you, your partner, your children. And you can just imagine someone, ringing up saying, look, dad's been hurt or mum's been hurt. Kids, come here, I need you to come here now. This is the reason why I work in this field. This is the reason why when you look at what's actually happening in the world, you don't run to the acts or the regulations or the codes of practice to see if you've got something wrong or not. You look at, when you're developing a system, how do I look after people? If I put my 18-year-old son or daughter in this workplace, would I be happy that I've told them what they need to know? And this brings up an important point of difference that I'd like you to remember. If somebody says to me they're running a business, most of their gentlemen, like a civil construction firm I was with the other day, they've got guys that have worked there 20, 30 years driving graders and excavators and so on. If he told me that he was going to employ 10 trainees, I'd say my system won't work anymore. We need to completely review what are the risks these 10 people are going to face and then make sure that's covered in your system. At the moment, with a safety system and a safe work method statement, often called a SWIMS, that's good enough for that workplace, and it's good enough for that workplace to get work off councils. But if you're going to dramatically change the people that are working for you, you need to relook at your system. So if you lose sight of this, you won't get it. And you can read through as I go through, but it's everything to a family to have their people around them and not hurt at work, and particularly not hurt because of someone's inaction. And on top of that, I've made a list there. There's legal fees, there's courts, there's fines, there's even risk of going to prison, and there's civil action from the victim or their family. And essentially, it's a bit like 1% at the front of advice, protection and thinking and caring for people will actually protect you 99% of the times. Now, in the fine print down the bottom there, for those that can read it, 97% of managers recently rated the walk up the driveway to know the family as the worst feeling. And the safety websites that I subscribe to, I see lots of information like this, and I thought that was a really useful point, because actually having to go and tell someone that a member of their family is hurt is, for many managers, they never decided to embark on a risky path, but something's happened. And often in a lot of small businesses, people are family, everybody knows everybody. So to actually have that is, if you understand this, you can start moving to designing something. If you think that safety is a paperwork process to cover you so that you've got the right piece of paper in place and you haven't got that care at the front, I think your system is lacking, and I think it'll let you down when you most need it. So what's the heavy fines? Category 1 fines are up to 3 million for companies and up to 5 years prison. Category 2 fines are 100K and 12 months prosecution wait time. So when somebody's had an accident and WorkSafe are investigating, they'll say, look, we've got 12 months to decide whether to take action or not. Most of the business people I know want an answer straight away. but they can't get one because it's got to be considered amongst a whole lot of other things. So it just means that it's possible that some of these incidents and the process to investigate and the court process may go on for 12 months or 2 years or longer, and that is stress on its own. So if that doesn't motivate you, you've also got a productivity issue. You've got to get another staff member, you've got to recruit someone else into the role, you've got to develop a return to work plan if the person's coming back to work, particularly if they've had more than 10 days off. You've got to juggle payroll to cover people that are absent, so you've got insurance premiums going up. So you've really got another personal impact on the business on top of what's already happened to you. And if you still have reservations, there's the taking people to work meetings, there's hospital meetings, there's medical meetings, there's trying to meet with a rehab consultant, there's trying to meet with WorkSafe, there's trying to meet with everybody and keep it all together. And if it's you alone as the manager of the small business, there is a lot of time soaked up in this. And people often ask me to give them a hand with this. And so in some areas I can, but often it's back to the manager because they're the ones who've got all the information. So guess what? To avoid the risk of prison, all you have to do is have a documented system. Now, the harmonised laws are in all states, so we're in Tasmania today. Victoria and Western Australia have different legislation. It's still strong, but it's different. Now, in the prison sentence on the right there, when I did the conference in May this year, 62 Australian workers have been killed at work in 2015. When I did it now, I looked, and the last stats from Safe Work Australia is 120. I just think there's 58 people died in that 5 or 6 months, and I'm not saying it's going to happen to everybody in every workplace, but it does happen, and we've got to make sure we protect ourselves for it. So what are the typical risks in your business? Where do you start? And this is often a very interesting question, particularly in Tasmanian businesses, because often they have more than one field that they operate in. I've put a list on the right of a couple of the type of risks that I see. I always like listing foolish acts because not sort of intentional foolish acts, but people that should know better have done something out of complacency or taken a shortcut or just wanted to knock off shortly so they didn't worry about the last bit. But when you're looking at your risks, you really should start out with what can kill or maim. And most people say, not much in my workplace. And so, well, actually, electricity can. And do you drive for work? May not even be your fault if you're driving for work, but these are the things we need to think about. I'm aware of some firms that have actually started to buy free vouchers for coffee for people driving from Hobart, Launceston and beyond to call into Campbelltown and have a free coffee as a way of putting a break in the trip. Don't get so tired. Don't drive many hours on the run. Just make sure that your energy is okay. And a personal thing from me in the risk areas, you could have a list of risks today that's actually suitable, but next week when you're exhausted after a hard week's work, you can't drive as far as you usually can. If you pay attention to that inner voice saying today is not so great, I might need an extra break, that's intelligent. That's how you actually protect yourself against these systems. So I'll give you 2 minutes. Think of the risks you've got at work. If you want to send in any of them, you can, but I'm happy if you work alone with someone else. But I want you to get an idea of the risks that are in your workplace before we get to one of the sheets later. So if you go for that now, I'll start talking in about 90 seconds. Okay, over to you. Okay, that's about a guess as 90 seconds because I just realised I don't have a second hand on my watch, which doesn't matter. Okay, when I go out and ask people in the small business world what are their risks, they usually talk about one angle of their business, but often when we start discussing things we find out that they have more arms to their business than they do other things. And it's a bit like a guy who might be, met a couple of months ago, he does window cleaning and gardening and landscaping and a bit of other general work which might involve fixing gates or using power tools. So where we started off from with what we thought was the scope of his business was relatively straightforward, but these other handyman jobs were entirely different. So this is important as well. There's another risk that no one else can see except you. Now this is where I get really annoyed with people selling 2012 compliant safe work systems. Is my folder that I've got that I give to people and my contents compliant with the WorkSafe legislation? I'd say yes, but it's a folder. It hasn't been applied to the workplace. So the graphic I want you to have in your mind is you need a system and you need to apply the risks to it to equal proactive safety. If you don't do that, you've got a documented system of words that actually mean something, but it has to be fitted into the workplace. It has to actually get there. Now, the other risk that you may not see, and this takes a little bit of effort. So it's not for an inexperienced 17-year-old who's never worked at a takeaway place before to come up with this, because they won't know the risk. Now, the skill is to predict what could happen with a combination of the equipment plus the people and the site and the risk together. So some people, sometimes you might get called overly paranoid, but if you can see people moving cars, you can see a group of preschoolers being led around, you can see the site's got lots of trees and people are not in vision, and the risk is start to look at you going, cars plus little people plus the lack of vision on the site, this may not be good. That's the kind of risk that I'm talking about, because I actually want you to be able to see what you would look at as saying, what if? Now, to delve Phil Owen in, a friend of mine in the safety world, he gave a session at the Safety Institute one night on what if, and it was one of the best brief sessions I've ever attended, because he was saying, have a look at what's actually around you, have a look what's possible, start thinking about those things, and could those things really hurt? So, going back on this one, you've got cars moving around, you've got people leading preschoolers around, you've got trees on the site, so obscured vision. The risks are that if someone gets hit by a car, they're going to get really hurt. So you would do something about it. Now you either get rid of the cars or you remove the people or you put up barriers that are actually going to work or you change the times and you look at options. But inexperienced people may not see that risk, whereas a seasoned person or experienced person will be able to get an idea. So foreseeable is an important word you need to learn in the safety world. Now, in all the investigations that I've assisted with and all of the other incidents that I've read about, which is getting into the hundreds if not thousands, most of the questions at the front are, would a reasonably practicable person, that just means somebody who knows what they're doing, think that that was a reasonable thing to put in place? And if they did, you're on the right track. If they didn't and thought, let's go back to that example of the cars and the preschoolers and the trees and the lack of vision, was it foreseeable? Yes, pretty easily really. So the idea is that foreseeable is what will get you fined. If a wheel falls off a plane and you don't live in a flight path and it bounces off a shed and slides along the road and hits the worker that's selling hot dogs on the corner for you, was it foreseeable? Not really. You've got to understand the difference between these two things. But when somebody rings me up and says, I need to review my safety system, yeah, why? Oh, I've just had an incident, yeah, and what's happened? Oh, person's in hospital but they're okay, right? So, now tell me what happened. Well, this happened. My questions are all about, was that foreseeable? And I had one recently where a person actually fell, and I won't go in too far because it's local, but the person fell and it was able to be resolved instantly. It would never happen again, and WorkSafe standards were happy with that because what happened was the person didn't put one thing in place exactly right. They've done it hundreds of times. To this day, it just missed. They just got it wrong. So we changed the engineering part of the system so it can't happen again. No problem. Whereas if that had been a consistent fault for that organisation and it had happened before, that would be an entirely different response, I imagine, from WorkSafe Tasmania. Okay, so let's say this is the first bit of an exercise. There's a page for you in a second that we can go through, but it's on the screen anyway if you haven't got it. So a typical incident: your employee fell from a stepladder while running a cable and landed on the edge of the table. He's going to hospital, have a scan, he's complaining of tingling in his legs, which is the scary part because you start going, oh, this could be pretty bad. So what safety documents would you have in place if that was you? And if you don't have staff, you're not off the hook because you've still got to manage your own safety, as I do. So when I have safety meetings, I usually have it with a few of the people I work with. I'd be pretty embarrassing if I didn't and have those records, but you need to look after your own safety. So on this next checklist, just go through and I'll give you a minute and come back to you, see what you've got. Okay, now this is, you might have more documents than this, you might have less, but this is the standard ones that I'm always looking for. If we've got this, we've got the base of a safety system and we can move from there and we can grow it where we need to or reduce it for things that don't really matter. So in this thing, safety policy, just going through quickly, is your promise about what you'll do around safety. So you'll hold safety meetings for a year are required or as needed if there's a big incident. You'll talk about inducting people. People from outside your organisation will say, this is a safe organisation, I feel happy working with them. A list of your common and not so common risks, pretty straightforward. An induction form based on those risks you've just collected. Incident forms to let people know, or an incident reporting process. Standard work processes. Now you can get some of these from WorkSafe Tasmania. There's about 20 or 30 on the site already there. I've got the link for you later in the session. Safe work method statement for high risk is required, for high risk work is required. So that's a bit about what's the job, what's the sequence it's going to be done in, and has everybody been told about it. I'll cover that a little bit more detail later in the session. Safety meeting agenda and record of what was decided. Template to assess the severity and likelihood of risks, and add 10 points if you actively use it. Now out of the 180 odd systems I've put in over the years, there's not a lot of incident forms get filled out. There's a lot of people that fix things as they go. And that's okay if it's a one person or two person organisation, something's not right, you fix it straight away. Yep. But an incident form is also your history of what you should be looking at. And you may not realise how some things have happened frequently. So if you've gone through this after that accident, said we've got these things in place, I'd go back and use those. So now I'd say have 1 point for each document and 10 if you're actively using it. And I'd have to say that in a lot of businesses that I go around to, they've probably got half the documents in place and they really struggle on the 10 if you're actively using. If anyone's got 18, please let Stephanie know and I'll send you a thank you. That'd be lovely. If so, you probably don't need the session. It's great though that you're here. So how did your business do? Let me know how you went. And most people really don't have these things up to date, or they're not actively using it, or it's just not exactly where they need to be. Nearly all the small business people I know spend time doing their business and they get to the other stuff when they do. So you need workplace health and safety policy and include consultation in it, because it's a requirement to consult with the people that you're impacting. Standard work processes for your risk, safe work method statement for high-risk work, list of your risks, incident form, safety meeting agenda, and so on. So these are the documents that perform the foundation of the system that you're going to. Now this one is the one I wanted to spend a little bit of time on, and if you want to make some notes you can go for it. But I've got a question, and you can send in the answer if you wish. Down the bottom it says your safety background, experienced, enthusiastic, new or no idea. Often I walk into people and they say, look, I've just bought a new arm to my business and I've been doing this but now I'm doing that, and will my safety system cover it? Sometimes it's similar, yes, parts of it, but you need to review it. Sometimes it's entirely different and the risks are entirely different, and 60% of the safety system, your policy and your standard information policies might be okay, but we need very different processes for how we operate that. So when I do inductions with people, before I get to start with this, I actually say, need to figure out whether you're experienced, enthusiastic, new or no idea. No idea means this is going to take longer. New means if you've got some skills, they're transferable. We'll look at how we can do that. Enthusiastic, I do meet some people that are really good in this field, very genuine, want to do the right thing, but just haven't got the experience underneath them. So we'll look at, if I haven't got it, how do I replace that and where do I get that from? Maybe that we prepare everything, then run it past somebody who's an expert in the field. Often that's a pretty cheap exercise, but it's just a way of getting that experienced overview, because there'll be things that a seasoned person sees that someone else doesn't. So in here, what is your scope? What is your business? And that is really important at the front. Now, I'd also get the feeling that with some of the mainland people that I've spoken to, it's more common for businesses in Tasmania to be more versatile. It's more common for them to maybe be the landscaper and the window cleaner and the handyman and get tangled up in other jobs. So when someone says to me they've got this business and they also do antennas, I go, uh-oh, they've got working at heights, now they're getting tangled up in cables, now we need to cover that off. So you need to make sure that what is your business scope, or what is it that you actually do at the front is right. And once you've got a total list of those major fields, might only be 3 or 1 or 2 or 5, then you can move to the next step. So for each one of those steps, what are the risks that can hurt people in that scope? What sort of things? So if you were talking about antennas, you're talking about working at heights. If you're talking about using lawnmowers, you're talking about using machinery, you need a safe work processes that you're going to follow. And then after you've listed out the risk for each one of those fields of your work, you divide them into high risk work. There's a list of that if anybody wants a copy of that. I've got one here with me, but I can send it out to you. List of high risk work is basically the requirement by the legislator that you will have a complete documented process which will describe all of the details about the job and the contact people, any relevant codes of practice, any other relevant information that needs to be known, the sequence of work that you will do, and also the sign-off page to show that everybody knows. I just wrote one about an area that I didn't know anything about the other day, but the people I wrote it for did, and it was about air conditioning, coolant, refrigerant, which eats the ozone, so it's got to be managed very carefully and you have to be licensed for it. So I sat down with the people that knew what they were talking about, documented all the steps that they've got in place, looked at the Australian standards, matched it to make sure that all works, presented it back, and now they're presenting it back to the licensing authority to see whether that meets what we're looking for. So it's not always that you have to have a knowledge of the content, but you do have to have an expert when you're putting these things together. The next thing is, how are those risks that you've identified going to be addressed? So I've got a page that I'll just list out the risks and then I'll say, do we cover this at training? Do we cover it in induction? If it's too hard to teach, do we insist on getting people of a certain skill level at the front? Do we cover it by signage? Do we cover it by PPE, personal protective equipment? What's the best way to actually manage that risk? And it's the cheapest and it's the most effective, because you can always spend more money than you need to. But if you look at the risk and say, okay, we've got a person on lawnmower, right, they need earphones, right. They probably, if they're doing things with whippersnippers and even lawnmowers, need safety glasses. We need sun protection. So sun protection, buy them a hat or get the sunblock, have it in your induction. So the idea is that you're protecting yourself for events now and future events. Now we've done that, the next thing at stage 4 is, are these things covered at induction? So you don't need to put every risk in there. Your induction page will be too long and people will get bored and not really read it. So I prefer to keep the induction page really critical about the major risks and the things that you need to do, such as, first part of it is what are the risks in your field, what we expect you to do. Second part is compliance with policies and procedures. Third part is that you will report incidents. You understand we've got a no-blame system and that actually acts as clear information. So person signing an induction form has got all of the big pieces of knowledge they need so they don't find something a week later that crops up and they don't know what to do. Because we also put in there, if in doubt, don't do it. Give me a phone call, let me know. If you think it's probably going to hurt you or someone else, just stop and give me a call. It's not worth proceeding because all those other things I mentioned could involve you in a 12-month process to try and untangle an incident that was avoidable. And as we spoke about before, if it's foreseeable, then it's an entirely different process because people are looking and saying there appears to be a direct breach of the laws or regulations or codes of practice here. The first thing you'll get if that happens is a letter from WorkSafe investigators saying, we need all your records for the last 2 years for everything around here. We also need all your records of directors there and other people who may be connected with your organisation and any other PCBUs that were on site at that time. And trust me, that alone becomes a nightmare to try and collect, but it's legally required. So again, that 1% of effort at the front of the system, I think pays and try to avoid that 99% of problem at the end. Now, there's probably a step 4A in here that's not really there, but once you've made up your induction list, you need to look at saying, if I tested that on a couple of people, what do you reckon they come back and say? So if you've got new people starting, you can use it as a test and say the consultation code of practice says have to involve people in decisions. Let me know. Did 2 weeks later, did the induction I gave you actually help? Oh, yes, no, whatever, but have that discussion. And keep a record of it in a diary. You don't have to go and keep minutes. Like any safety records, you just should keep indefinitely, I believe, regardless of the 3 or 5 or 7 year requirement. But if you wrote down in the diary that caught up with Bill and John and Mary, asked them about the induction and they said, no, it was fine, you're fine to proceed. But if one of them come up and said, oh, you didn't tell me that the problem that if I'm working late at night, the external gate gets shut by someone else and I got stuck in here and I didn't know who to call. Little things like that can save big problems later. Okay, number 5 is workplace health and safety meetings. By law, under the harmonised legislation, you're required to hold 4 a year. Most people go, all right, quarterly. In my system, I send out reminders to people with an agenda to say it's about time to do this. You also need to hold a safety meeting if something has gone wrong. So if there's been an incident that is significant or reportable, or you think this is something that we really should get onto, have a safety meeting. Talk it through, work out what next needs to be done, and put it in place and keep a record. Safety meetings I've seen in organisations ranging from tick the box, we had one, we all sat down, we said, didn't say much, or somebody ran the whole thing, and we took off, through to an organisation that I was working with this morning. Their safety meetings they're great. They're efficient. There's a brief agenda. There's all the points. There's the action that needs to be done, who's doing it, and we review it as we meet at each meeting. It runs for 30 minutes with about 7 people, and it is efficient. It's a pleasure to go to. It's a pleasure to contribute to, and I know the feedback from the people at the meeting is, this is efficient. I'm not wasting time. I'm not going to a meeting for a meeting's sake. We're not going to a meeting to tick the box. Now, the next one in here, number 6, is toolbox meetings. And these are, to me, invaluable because you can have your 4 safety meetings a year, but if you've got 3 people on a different site and they've worked together in the past, and while they're on the site, there's other contractors turning up, and they sing out to the other contractor, look, we're just having a toolbox meeting, we're removing these trees on the left-hand side of the property. Contractors yell out, that's okay, we're doing painting and carpet relaying and something else on the right-hand side of the property, that's okay, no problem. Now, I have had an example where a WorkSafe investigator has turned up on a site, and it was a few years ago when they were doing all the extension to the schools under the Rudd-Gillard money for schools, and the contractors were all working quite well, and everybody was individually looking after themselves, and they'd sort of said hello to each other but not really had a discussion about each other, only to find mid-morning that one of the contractors had booked a crane to lift up roof trusses of a pretty large size across where all the other contractors were working, and nobody had spoken about it. It was listed on a whiteboard, but not everybody had signed in on the day. So their first opportunity to let them know was the whiteboard was in front of the sign-in book. Crane should have been on there turning up at 11 o'clock. Everybody individually would have easily ticked off that they were doing what they should be doing, except for the slack part about not signing in. But the inspector was rather alarmed to find that this roof truss was going to be picked up and swung across these other workers, and nobody had thought to have that discussion. So that triggered a pretty important meeting and lots of notes, and so it should have. So there's another example recently where a person had booked again, lifting precast concrete, and the Safe Work Methods statement, they noticed it was a little bit closer to the road. The traffic management group rang and said they'd had an illness and they were going to be 30 minutes late. And at the last minute, the site manager and the project manager worked out the separate information. They chatted with each other and delayed the crane. Had they not have done that, the crane would have been on site, no traffic management, no warning. Was it foreseeable? Yes. Was all the information there? Yes. Did the 2 managers, the project manager and the site manager, talk to each other? Fortunately, yes. If they hadn't, then that is highly likely to have an accident, highly likely to be an incident, at the best near miss or otherwise worse. You can cause car crashes when people come around corners and there's inadequate traffic management. It was an example of consultation working really well. Okay, so just going back over this, and you go back and close the loop. Now that's a really important thing to do in the safety world, close the loop. So it took a while to draw up this flowchart to make it work like a loop and get those arrows to work backwards for me. But a really important system is if you've got this and you could display this to someone coming to work for you, or you said to somebody, this is how I manage what I do, I believe that you are a long way, if not already down the track of being compliant. You've looked at things, and I have had examples where businesses have been told, look, what happened was one of those things a bit outside the box. We didn't really appreciate that someone would park a car against the traffic management sign and block it from view. And we didn't think that would happen, but it did. But because you've got a system in place and you can show that you're using it, I think in every time I've known that, any investigation about any near miss or incident has been pretty straightforward, and if anything, it's been a positive discussion between WorkSafe regulators, staff, and the people on site about, how could they do it better? This is one of those things. If you haven't got a working system in place and a person turns up and says, someone's just been hurt, we've been notified, were they inducted? Not really. Oh, but I've shown them, right? Have you got any records? No. Have you got a safety policy? Yes. Do you use it? Well, I've got it and I use it to put in for tenders and things, but no, we don't talk about it that much. As soon as that starts, the investigation starts moving down a different process. And it's one of looking for gaps to prove a problem exists, which may result in your prosecution. The other way, having a working system that actually is clear, people know about it, you've made every attempt, you've got, everything you can think of covered. And I'm not talking about hours and hours and hours of work in this. I'm talking about maybe 2 or 3 really good quality hours to sit down and put this in place properly. With the Safe Work Method statement I wrote about the refrigerant, I didn't know anything about the topic, but I knew about the format. I had people around me who knew what the risks were. They could give me that. I put the information in. I believe that we've set up in 2 or 3 hours work an excellent Safe Work Method statement that is usable for the years to come. It's also useful as a benchmark for other Safe Work Method statements they put together so they can see what it looks like and how to do it. Now, I could have done a Safe Work Method statement that probably took maybe even 2 hours less, and it might have got across the line, but it would not have helped them in the years to come. It didn't act as an education document, and so I believe that instead of being tangled up in that job for another hour every few months to fix things and modify it, I actually put forward a system that is high enough that it will exceed what is required. It will last in time, subject to the updates it needs, and it's a quality document. So what I'm saying here is, if you don't have 2 or 3 hours quality time putting this together at the front, my guess is that, and this is from incidents that I've investigated in the past, you've probably got 20 or 30 hours of my time trying to pull together what we need. You've probably lost 100 hours. WorkSafe have probably invested 20, 30 hours. You've lost all your productivity. So in no time at all, we're talking about nearly 200 hours of lost time apart from the injury and the medical expenses and the replacement of staff. And very easily, for many years we had that accident iceberg, say small percentage at the top, major at the bottom. In my field, in the small business stuff, 2 or 3 hours intense stuff at the front to make sure it's right pays off enormously at the other end. So, you know what your scope is, you know what your business is, you've got a list and you can show it. There's your first lot of evidence. Your second lot of evidence is the risks. Your third is the high risk work, and that SWIM statement, Safe Work Method statement. You've got how your risks were addressed, and that can be a discussion with a group of people on one of the templates that I have in place, or one that you've got that covers induction, training, information, personal protective equipment, under supervision. What have you done? And then make sure those highlighted ones are covered at the induction. Hold your safety meetings, and then come back and have toolbox meetings to make sure that fits on site. Like when I spoke about the crane and the roof trusses, having a discussion takes 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes. It saves a lot of work. And if something does go wrong, you can count on the investigation taking up a lot of your time. And so it should. If somebody's been hurt, you want to prevent it from ever happening again. So, if there's any questions, please feel free to fire them in. I'll keep moving to the next couple of slides, going exactly right for time, so I'm quite happy about that. I mentioned that safe work processes are on the website. That's on the slide coming up. I sat with a group of landscapers and gardeners a little while ago, took them to that site, and they went, oh, I'll have that and that and that. And it was fantastic because in no time at all, they felt as though they'd met the standards that we need them to meet. They had a clear understanding of what's required. They can modify them to suit the machinery that they've got, or put an extra step in for something they might have. And that list is already available for their free. Now, high-risk area, high-risk work must be covered by a Safe Work Method statement and signed by all present. Now, gone that through a few times. It's got 3 main parts. What's the job outline? Who's the contact details? Who's the manager? What's the relevant regulations, codes of practice that you need to look at? So if you're doing work that's above water and there's a risk of drowning, there's a code of practice on diving and that whole related field. If you're working at heights, there's information in there. codes of practice, a quick way to find them if you've got a pen is jump on Safe Work Australia's site or WorkSafe Tasmania, click on that, and in one of the major boxes in Google, coming up underneath that is codes of practice. Click on there and have a look at the alphabetical list. See which ones fit your business. They're pretty obvious in their titles. And say to some people, look, and they'll say, I'm not sure whether this applies to me or not. So, okay, have a look at the code of practice, look at the index. If you're not sure, in the back of the codes of practice is some excellent case studies and examples. It's a really great way of getting a feel for what's actually covered. And if you think that covers, then go back to the middle of the standard and look at the chapter on that topic. I've attended seminars with the Safety Institute on almost all the codes of practice. I don't remember all of them, but I remember them enough to think, oh, I think that was in a code. I'll go and have a look. I'll double check. Then the next part of the Safe Work method statement is the tasks in sequence and how each risk is addressed. So what are you going to do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What's the risk of that? So if you're working with forklift or vehicles, or the risk could be death or injury or whatever, and then talk about what you put in place to reduce that risk down to an acceptable level. And then the sign-on section for workers to indicate their knowledge of what and how to do the task. So I was with a group a little while ago. They were doing plumbing work. 3 people on site had turned up and signed on to the swims and knew what they were doing for the day. Person turned up to make a delivery and then got chatting to the people on site, then picked up a cable to start helping. The person from Taswater called in. There's only 3 names and there's 4 people on site. Yes, they got into strife, and so they should. The person said, it wasn't my intention to end up doing work, but the thing is, it's there, it's how to do it, it is a condition, you must sign on and correct something if it isn't right. So the signing on section is how you satisfy that everybody knows about it. Okay, high risk work. If you need a Safe Work method statement, you can go to WorkSafe, type in Safe Work method statement, Tasmania, it'll come up. If you need Safe Work procedures, there's a link there. There's 20 or 30 of them. I try not to ever get people to rewrite what's already around and what's a good base to start from. Just have a look at it, modify it to what you need, put it in place and make sure everybody knows. So, any questions? If you've got any, please feel free to send in. If not, then basically thank you and stay safe. Thank you for your time. Like I said, I tried to make it a practical session. I like finishing early, so I can do that. So I'll stay around for another couple of minutes. If there's any questions or anybody's got any information, please feel free to email me or go to the website, contact me through there, but the easiest email is safety@sbsafetysystems.com.au. So that's safety@sbsafetysystems.com.au. Happy to assist, happy to send out free information that I've already got. Like I said, the reason for being in safety in this world is for people. It's about not having systems that I present where people go, this is too much paperwork, I don't think we're going to follow it. So well, we're going to have some minimum amounts, but let me work out what's the leanest way we can write it, and let's reflect what you do, and then we can argue that it has to be followed. If we've written a system that is too large, cumbersome, has got bits in it that you don't need, people won't read it. I have seen Safe Work method statements out to 35 pages. Some of that's mining and big heavy industry, and maybe they need to have that, but I know from so many comments late on Friday afternoon, mate, we don't read that. We just do what we do. And that to me is always a concern, because if you've got an attitude of paperwork is irrelevant, then you've got a massive safety problem to get it back under control again. So with that, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for the opportunity to speak to you today, and hopefully that was useful to you. If you feel like dropping me a line or let me know what you think, please feel free. Like I said, safety@sbsafetysystems.com.au. Thank you very much.
All right, and thank you very much, Neil, for presenting your webinar today, Safety in Small Business in Simple to Follow Steps. And thank you to everyone who did participate with today's webinar. With the documents that Neil was referring to, if you didn't sort of receive them on the handouts, which is sitting on your control panel. I certainly will send those through after this, this webinar. And again, once you do leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we certainly appreciate you completing that feedback and providing your comments about the presentation and your webinar experience. So on behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and our presenter today, Neil Johnston from Small Business Safety Systems, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the day. We hope it's a safe and healthy one. Thank you.